right, so today we're actually going to be combining two hives together. It's August now, which even though it's a really hot day today, we're always thinking about winter, and we feel like these hives won't survive because they just won't have a big enough population to get them into a successful overwintering. So we found one hive that you can see here. It is an emerged cell. So when we pulled open our hive, this is what we found, and it tells us that we should either be looking for a virgin or any signs of a queen. And we've waited a few weeks and have found no indications of a queen, so it's very likely that either the virgins killed one another or the mating flight was a failure, and this hive is essentially hopelessly queenless. So we've decided to combine this hopelessly queenless hive with a hive that has a new queen in it but a smaller population, so they'll kind of help each other, boost each other up, and prepare them for the winter so that they'll be more likely to survive as one unit. This is my hive that doesn't have a queen. We're actually going to be putting a frame of capped brood into it, and the reason we do this is that it gives the bees something to do and to kind of hold them together while we join these two hives together. And then in order to prevent the bees from immediately attacking one another, we just use newspaper to kind of slow the introduction down. And all that does is it allows the bees to slowly chew through it, and by the time that they actually meet one another, then they're friends and they're familiar with each other's scent, so that they're much less likely to fight. So this over here is my hive that I have my new young queen. She's safely in a cage. I'll be releasing her in just a second. I do my best to line the two boxes up. There we go. Oh, and now I can release the queen because they're safely in their new location. All right, so we've released our queen. She's safely gone back down, and we would give this hive a minimum of a week to join together before we inspected them to see if the queen is still laying and still happy and they have joined together as one unit. And that just gives them some time where you're not disturbing them to let them get settled and be happy with their new queen before you go in and make an inspection.
Hey everyone, it is the second week of August right now, so if you haven't already, now is the perfect time to make sure that you are doing your Varroa monitoring. Like we've already mentioned, it's really important to make sure that you are not just monitoring visually for mites, just waiting until you see mites on the backs of bees. By the time you see that, the infestation will already be very severe and it'll be too late. So you want to make sure that you use one of the approved monitoring methods, especially because those will give you a treatment threshold. So those will give you a number that will let you know whether you are at the point where you need to treat for Varroa mites or not, so that's really important. If you take a look at our other YouTube videos, we have a different video for each of the different types of Varroa monitoring, so you can take a look at them and decide which you want to do. So we usually stick with the alcohol shake here at TTP, so I'm going to do that right now. This yard has about 11 colonies in it, so we're going to take about 5 samples. Alright, so here I go. So this is a brood frame. You always want to be sampling from a brood frame because that is where you'll often find a lot of the mites who are on the backs of bees. And that's because they reproduce in brood cells, so then they'll exit those brood cells when whatever bee is inside hatches out, and they will climb on top of another bee to either feed on it or to move around the colony to find somewhere else to enter a cell. Just gonna shake it off. You always want to do at least 2 or 3 frames to get a more representative sample. Oh, and another thing that I should have mentioned is that I already have my queen caged because we really don't want the queen to end up in our Varroa sample. That is not ideal. Ow! So they don't always like being shaken, but that's okay. And I have my half cup scoop right here. A half cup is about 300 bees. I'm gonna shake them so they all go in one place in the tub. Put them in my jar. Put the lid on and give it a shake. I've also already labeled this jar so I know where it came from. And we're going to take this jar back to our lab and we're going to do our Varroa counts there. It's just a little bit more efficient that way, but if you only have a couple of hives, you can get a Varroa shaker and you can just do your samples in the yard and make sure that you're taking notes in the yard. You can do it whatever way works for you depending on the scale of your operation. So it's really extra important to make sure that you're monitoring for Varroa and also treating for Varroa if you're above the treatment threshold in the fall. And that's for two reasons. So one, it's really important to make sure that everything is good in your colony going into the winter. I know right now it's August and it seems like winter is far away, but it is actually at the time of year where the bees are certainly getting close to beginning their winter prep, and you should be as well. So you want to make sure that those mite populations are under control for the winter, because otherwise you might lose your colonies over the winter or even in late fall, and that's really, really not what you want. So the best way to prevent that is staying on top of your mites earlier in the season. Another thing is that in around this time of year, when the bee population is actually kind of starting to taper off a little bit, because they don't need to be super, super populous over the winter, just populous enough to have the strength to maintain their temperature within the hive. So at this point of year, the bee population is going to start to taper off a bit, but the mite population is going to be reaching its peak. So that's really dangerous because the bees, the worker population won't necessarily be strong enough to be able to deal with that huge mite population that's peaking right now. Especially if your colony is absolutely booming, it's doing super well at this time of year, you're like, oh, this is the best season ever for my colony, they're bringing in all this honey, the population is so big, they're doing great. That is a pretty good sign that there's going to be a lot of mites in your colony, especially at this time of year. So a booming colony will be raising a lot of brood, and brood is of course where the mites reproduce under capped brood cells. So if there's a lot of brood in the colony, there's going to be probably a lot of mites in the colony. So a lot of people are sometimes shocked when they end up losing their best colony to mites in winter or late fall, but it's because those populations are so heavily intertwined. So today we are going to quickly make a sticky board. We do have another video on our YouTube channel that is all about sticky boards, as well as every other recommended method of Varroa monitoring, but it doesn't really show you how to actually make the sticky board. Not that it's a complicated process, but we're gonna do it really quick just for funsies. Okay, so we are going to end up putting our sticky boards on this tray here. So we use manila folders just because they're nice and sturdy, so they are a nice, easy thing to use, and we want the folder to fit nicely into the tray. So first we are going to just cut the ends off. We like to keep the end that says name and number because we're going to use that to label the boards with what hive number they were in. So I am just going to cut here. You can obviously use a pair of scissors too. It is not a big deal. Alright, so we've made our cut. That fits pretty nicely in the tray. It could maybe be a little bit longer, but it's okay. So our next step is we are going to take a Sharpie, works good, and we are going to draw some grid lines on the folder. So these really don't have to be perfect at all. It's just to give your eyes something to follow to make counting less daunting, especially if there are lots of mites, if the infestation is kind of high. This will make it a lot easier to count, but again, they really don't have to be perfect or even or anything like that. So I'm also going to make lines this way. Okay, so as you can see, we have a grid on our folder. It is not a perfect grid. The lines are not very straight. The squares are not the same size. It's not a big deal at all. So in order to put some sticky in the sticky boards, we are going to put some Crisco on them. You can also use something like Vaseline. But we have Crisco, so that's what we're going to use today. I'm going to put on a glove, not because obviously it'll hurt you or anything, but just because it's really hard to get Crisco off your hands if you get it all over yourself, and I don't really want greasy hands for the rest of the day. So I have this, I think it's a putty knife, but this scraper thing, and I'm just going to take a good amount of Crisco and ooh, look at that. Butter it up. And doesn't have to be a very thick layer of Crisco. One thing to keep in mind when you're putting Crisco on is to try and make sure not to get it on the part that you are going to write your hive numbers, because it's really hard to write once you have Crisco everywhere. Again, it really does not have to be very perfect, but everywhere that has a grid should have some Crisco on it. All right, you can see I have my nice layer of Crisco on here, and then I'm going to put it in the tray. And that's all there is to it. We are putting in the sticky boards that we made. So first things first is we want to mark them with the hive number so that when we take them out, we can keep track of what mites belong to what colony. So I'm going to write the name of the yard because we have more than one yard, and I'm going to write the colony number. And it's worth noting that this method will only work if you have screen bottom boards. It will not work with just regular wooden bottom boards, so make sure that you are using a screened bottom board. There's different styles of bottom boards, but the ones that we have, there's a wooden piece that goes along the back, so I am just going to slide my tray with our sticky board right in there. And then to make sure that no bees or any other critters can get in there, I'm going to put the piece of wood back in. Okay, so those are in, and we are going to wait for 3 days, and then after 3 days we're going to come back, we're going to take them out, and we're going to count them. Okay, so 3 days have passed, so we are going to take our sticky boards out today. Sometimes if they're a little stuck, you can use your hive tool. So you can see there's some stuff on there. Okay, so we are finally at the stage of actually counting our sticky boards. So it's kind of hard to count them if you don't know what they look like. So if this is your very first time counting sticky boards, I would definitely recommend that you do a little bit of Googling first. Take a look at what Varroa mites actually look like. We have a little jar of dead ones here, so I'll include a close-up shot so that you can see. It can also be good to have, this is a headlamp, but to have a little flashlight with you, especially it's kind of dark in this room, so if you're having trouble seeing, having a flashlight and a magnifying glass is definitely a good idea. And then lastly, I usually have a sharp pencil or a pen and I circle them as I go. It's just much easier to count after if you've already circled them. Yeah, so let's get started. Okay, so the way that we're gonna do it is we're gonna follow the grid lines, and that way you always know which ones you've already looked at and you don't get lost and accidentally miss one. So we're gonna go in that pattern. You could do this pattern if you like it better. Doesn't matter, just keep it consistent, and that way you have less chance of getting lost or forgetting where you were, or missing a square, or anything like that. So I usually get pretty right in there, get up close and personal. So as you've probably noticed, Varroa mites are kind of a dark brownish red, and a lot of this debris is also a dark brownish red, which does not really help very much. I got a little bit of Crisco on it, but that there is a Varroa mite. That's a Varroa mite. This one's still alive. You can see its legs flailing around a little. That kind of looks like a Varroa mite, but I'll put it next to there and you can see it's not the right shape. It is the right color, but it's not the right shape, and when you compare it to the actual Varroa mite, you can kind of tell the difference. The Varroa mite has little legs sticking out the bottom. Right now we're looking at her underside, but her top side is fairly shiny, and you can just kind of tell that they're not quite the same. This is kind of shiny and kind of the right shape from a certain perspective, but then when you kind of touch it, you can see that it's not really the right color. It's too thin, it doesn't have any legs, it's just not quite what we're looking for. Oh, missed that one there. Okay, so especially when you're starting out, I would definitely recommend going through and looking at each square at least twice, just to make sure that you don't miss anything. And definitely just take your time. There's no rush, especially right now we only have 3 sticky boards, so that's not a whole lot. So we counted 1, 2, 3, 3. So we will keep track of that. We will write it down. Because they were in for 3 nights, we're going to divide that number by 3. So 3 divided by 3 is 1, and that is our number to look at if we're over the treatment threshold, and we'll talk about that more in a second. And another thing to mention is you're only looking at what is on the manila folder. Even if we were to see ones on our tray, we wouldn't count it, just to kind of keep consistent and stay within what is actually on the folder. Okay. So this next one is a little trickier because you can see there's a very thick pile of debris here. So that makes it a lot trickier to count, but that's okay. And if you have a big thing like this is a wax moth cocoon. I'm just gonna kind of take a look and then kind of push it out of the way to make sure there's none hiding underneath it. When you get to this thick pile, you can kind of try and gently fan it out with your pen or pencil. It's a little bit tricky to do, but you don't want to miss anything that's in the pile, so just kind of spread it around a little bit more so it's not all on top of each other. And ones with lots of debris like this are a little trickier. One way to avoid getting so much debris is to make sure that you're not putting fresh supers on while the sticky boards are there, because the bees will be going through, they'll be cleaning all of the, well, if you're putting foundation frames in, it doesn't matter, but if you're putting drawn super frames in, then the bees are going to be going through and cleaning that all out to get it ready to use again, and as they clean, things will drop onto the ground and you'll end up with all kinds of little bits of wax on your sticky board. So don't put fresh supers on when you have sticky boards in. I'm going to spend a lot more time in these quadrants that have a lot of debris in them because there's a lot of places for them to hide. Okay, I'm not seeing any on this one. I've looked at it twice and I'm still coming up with 0. So it is kind of hard to trust yourself when it's a 0, but sometimes they're just zeros, and that's a result too, so that's okay. All right, so I'm going to put this to the side and look at our last one here. That's a mite. Oh my gosh. Something also to keep in mind is this label part here. You can either count it or not count it as long as you are consistent in between each sticky board. It's kind of up to you. I don't think it really makes a huge difference as long as you're being consistent in between your hives. So whenever there is a dead bee on our sticky board, we always take a look at it, and this one actually does have a Varroa mite on it. Oh yeah, she's alive. She's crawling around on there. So there is a Varroa mite there, and we will count her. I'm gonna take a look at the other side. No, just the one. So I'm gonna circle that so I remember to count it. Again, I'm gonna look at this bee. This one doesn't seem to have any. Sometimes you'll see them where they are still alive and kind of running around, somehow not getting stuck on the Crisco in parts where it's gotten thin. And if that's the case, I kind of use my pencil to just poke them down into the Crisco so that they can't move anymore, because if they run off, then I'll forget they were there, maybe count them twice. So just something to bear in mind. This one was sneaky because it's kind of on an angle, so that is a mite, but from the top it doesn't really look like that. So anything that you're not sure about, try and look at it from a couple different angles. That's one there. You can see those really distinctive little V-shaped legs kind of at the bottom on that side.
this one, we have 1. Always following our same grid pattern so we don't miss anything. 2. 3, because there's 1 on that bee. 4, 5, 6. So again, because these were in for 3 nights, we're going to divide the number of mites by 3. So 6 divided by 3 is 2, and that will be our number for the treatment threshold.